Let me take you back to the spring of 1900. A crew of sponge divers from the Greek island of Symi were sailing home from North Africa when a storm forced them to shelter near a small rocky island called Antikythera. It's barely a speck on the map, a limestone outcrop roughly halfway between Crete and the Greek mainland. The kind of place sailors passed without a second thought. While waiting for the weather to clear, the divers decided to search the local waters for sponges. One of them, a man named Elias Stadiatis, descended to roughly 45 meters, about 150 feet, and found something unexpected. Not sponges, bodies, or what looked like bodies, rotting corpses, severed limbs, faces staring up from the seafloor. Stadiatis panicked. He surfaced so quickly he nearly killed himself from decompression. When he caught his breath and described what he'd seen, the captain, Dimitrios Kondos, went down himself to investigate. What Kondos found wasn't a massacre, it was a shipwreck. An ancient shipwreck loaded with Greek bronze and marble statues. The bodies Stadiatis had seen were corroded sculptures, their green patina making them look like decomposing flesh in the murky water. The divers reported their discovery to the Greek government. What followed was the first major underwater archaeological excavation in history. From 1900 to 1901, working with primitive diving suits and facing constant danger from depth and currents, the sponge divers brought up treasure after treasure. Bronze statues of remarkable quality, marble sculptures that had survived 2,000 years underwater, gold jewelry, silver coins, glassware, pottery. The ship had clearly been carrying a fortune, probably Greek art, being transported to Rome during the period when Rome was systematically looting the treasures of the conquered Greek world. One diver died during the salvage operation. 2 others were permanently paralyzed from decompression sickness. This was dangerous work, conducted at the very edge of what 1900s diving technology could manage. Among all these spectacular finds, one object attracted almost no attention at first. It was a lump of corroded bronze, roughly the size of a large book. It had broken into several pieces, probably during the original shipwreck or during the rough salvage process. The surface was encrusted with 2,000 years of marine growth. It looked, frankly, like garbage. Museum workers set it aside in a storage room while they focused on the more obviously valuable items. Several months passed. Then, on May 17, 1902, an archaeologist named Valerios Stais was examining the stored artifacts when he noticed something strange about the corroded lump. Embedded in the green crust, barely visible, were what appeared to be gear wheels, cogwheels, precision-cut teeth, meshing together in a complex arrangement. Stais knew immediately that this was significant, but he also knew that what he was seeing was impossible. The ancient Greeks didn't have gear technology. Everyone knew that. Sophisticated mechanical devices weren't invented until the medieval period at the earliest. This had to be something else, maybe a much more recent object that had fallen onto the wreck site, or some kind of mistake. He was wrong. It wasn't a mistake. The gear wheels were real, and they were ancient. Dating the artifact took decades of careful work. The style of the inscriptions, the composition of the bronze alloy, the other objects found with it on the ship. Eventually, researchers established that the mechanism was built sometime between 150 and 100 BCE, over 2,000 years ago. The shipwreck itself appears to have occurred around 70 to 60 BCE, meaning the device was already an antique when the ship went down. So, what was it? For the first half of the 20th century, nobody could say with certainty. The technology to examine the internal structure simply didn't exist. The fragments were too corroded, too fragile to take apart. Early researchers proposed various theories. It was an astrolabe, a navigational instrument, a clockwork toy. But the gear complexity they could glimpse through the corrosion suggested something far more sophisticated than any of those explanations. The Antikythera Mechanism, as it came to be called, would guard its secrets for another 50 years. The breakthrough came in 1971. A British physicist named Derek de Solla Price had become obsessed with the Antikythera Mechanism. For years, he had been studying photographs and making careful observations of the fragments. But he needed to see inside, to understand how the gears connected, how the device actually worked. Working with Greek authorities and using X-ray imaging technology that had only recently become available, Price finally got his wish. The resulting images revealed a complexity that stunned the scientific world. Inside the corroded shell were at least 30 interlocking gears, 30 precision-cut bronze cogwheels, ranging in size from roughly 1.5 centimeters to over 13 centimeters in diameter. The teeth were triangular, carefully shaped to mesh smoothly. Some gears were mounted on the same axle, others connected through intermediate wheels. The whole assembly was mounted inside a wooden case, roughly the size of a shoebox, with bronze plates covering the front and back. This wasn't a simple device. This was a sophisticated mechanical computer. Price published his findings in 1974 in a landmark paper. His conclusion was revolutionary. The Antikythera Mechanism was a device for calculating astronomical positions. You could input a date by turning a hand crank, and the gears would compute where the sun, moon, and possibly the planets would be in the sky on that date. Let me explain why this is extraordinary. In the ancient world, tracking celestial bodies was critically important. The calendar depended on it. Religious festivals were timed by lunar phases. Farmers planted and harvested based on the solar year. Sailors navigated by the stars. Predicting eclipses was considered divine knowledge, the ability to foretell when the sun or moon would disappear from the sky. But calculating these positions accurately is fiendishly difficult. The moon doesn't move in a simple circle around the Earth. Its orbit is elliptical. Its speed varies. The plane of its orbit wobbles. The ancient Greeks knew this. Their astronomers had been carefully observing and recording lunar motion for centuries. To predict where the moon would be on a given date, you needed to account for all these irregularities. That required mathematics. Sophisticated mathematics. Calculations that took trained astronomers hours or days to perform by hand. The Antikythera Mechanism did it mechanically, instantly. You turned the crank, and the gears computed the answer. But the real shock came in 2006. A new research initiative called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project used cutting-edge technology to examine the fragments in unprecedented detail. High-resolution X-ray tomography, essentially three-dimensional X-rays, revealed features that Price had never seen. The device didn't just have 30 gears. It had at least 37, and possibly more in sections that hadn't survived. And the inscriptions, tiny Greek letters covering the bronze plates, were far more extensive than anyone had realized. Over 3,500 characters of text, a user's manual built directly into the device. What the 2006 research revealed was that the Antikythera Mechanism was far more capable than Price had imagined. It could calculate the position of the sun in the zodiac for any given date, the position of the moon, including its irregular motion, and here's the remarkable part, using a special gear arrangement called an epicyclic system that physically modeled the moon's elliptical orbit. The phase of the moon, whether it was new, full, quarter, or somewhere in between. Solar and lunar eclipses. The device could predict when they would occur, possibly decades in advance. The timing of the ancient Olympic Games and 3 other major Greek athletic festivals. And, though this is still debated, possibly the positions of the 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Let me focus on that lunar calculation for a moment because it's the key to understanding just how sophisticated this device was. The moon's orbit is irregular. It moves faster when it's closer to Earth slower when it's farther away. Ancient astronomers knew this, but modeling it mechanically was thought to be beyond ancient capabilities. The Antikythera Mechanism solved this problem using a brilliant piece of engineering, a pin and slot device. One gear has a small pin mounted slightly off-center. That pin slots into a groove on a second gear mounted at a slight angle. As the gears rotate, the pin slides back and forth in the slot, causing the output speed to vary, faster, then slower, then faster again. The variation precisely mimics the moon's actual motion. This mechanism wasn't rediscovered until the 14th century CE, roughly 1,500 years later. The person who invented it for the Antikythera mechanism was, as far as we know, the first human being to solve this problem mechanically. We don't know their name. Several teams have now built working replicas of the Antikythera mechanism. When you operate one, it feels almost surreal. You turn a small crank on the side, the gears engage smoothly. On the front dial, pointers move to show the positions of the sun and moon. On the back, spiral dials track eclipse cycles and calendar systems. It works. 2,000 years later, built from ancient specifications, it still works. The inscriptions on the device have now been largely translated. They describe how to use the mechanism, what the various dials indicate, and how to interpret the eclipse predictions. The text is written in Koine Greek, the common language of the ancient Mediterranean world. Some researchers believe the writing style and certain technical terms suggest the device was built in the tradition of the great astronomer Hipparchus, who worked on the island of Rhodes in the 2nd century BCE. Others have proposed connections to the legendary mathematician Archimedes, who died in 212 BCE, but whose mechanical inventions were famous throughout the ancient world. We may never know exactly who built it, but we know they were a genius, perhaps one of the greatest engineers who ever lived. Here's where I need to step back and be honest with you. The Antikythera mechanism isn't really a mystery, not in the way that most things I investigate are mysteries. We know what it is. We know roughly when it was built. We know how it works. We've published peer-reviewed papers about it in journals like Nature. The mystery isn't the device itself, the mystery is what it implies. For most of the history of archaeology and the history of science, we believed in a relatively simple narrative. Technology progresses forward. The ancients had simple tools. The medievals had slightly better tools. The Industrial Revolution gave us machines. And here we are. The Antikythera mechanism doesn't fit that narrative. This device represents a level of mechanical sophistication that we didn't think existed until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe, roughly 1,400 years later. The precision gear cutting, the epicyclic mechanisms, the differential outputs. These weren't supposed to be ancient technologies. And yet, here's the physical proof sitting in a museum in Athens that they were. So the question becomes, was this a one-off, a single brilliant inventor creating something ahead of their time? Or was there an entire tradition of advanced mechanical engineering in the ancient world that we've simply lost? There's actually evidence for the latter. Ancient writers describe mechanical marvels that we've long dismissed as mythology or exaggeration. The Roman architect Vitruvius, writing in the 1st century BCE, describes complex mechanical devices, including water clocks and odometers. The Greek engineer Hero of Alexandria, writing in the 1st century CE, describes automated theaters, coin-operated machines, and programmable devices. For centuries, historians assumed these descriptions were fanciful. Surely the ancients couldn't have built such things. Surely these were legends, not engineering reports. After the Antikythera mechanism, that assumption looks naive. If the ancient Greeks could build a bronze computer that calculated lunar positions using epicyclic gearing, then suddenly, Hero's automated theaters don't seem so impossible. Vitruvius's odometers become plausible. The legendary inventions of Archimedes, mirrors that could set ships on fire, claws that could lift warships from the water, start to look less like mythology and more like lost engineering. But here's what troubles me. If this technology existed, why don't we have more of it? Why is the Antikythera mechanism essentially unique? Why didn't anyone else build devices like this? There are several possible answers, and I don't think any of them are entirely satisfying. Possibility 1. We haven't found the others yet. Bronze is valuable. Throughout history, bronze artifacts have been melted down and recycled. The Antikythera mechanism only survived because it sank to the bottom of the sea, away from the furnaces that consumed most ancient bronze. There might have been hundreds of similar devices. They might all have been recycled into coins, weapons, or decorations. We know this happened. The Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was eventually sold for scrap. Countless bronze statues were melted. Why not mechanical devices too? Possibility 2. The knowledge was restricted. Some historians have suggested that this level of mechanical expertise was a closely guarded secret, passed down through small groups of specialized craftsmen. If only a handful of workshops knew how to build such devices, and if that knowledge was transmitted orally rather than in writing, then a single disaster, a plague, a war, an economic collapse could have wiped out the entire tradition. The fall of Rome was catastrophic for many technologies. Libraries were destroyed, trade networks collapsed, specialized craftsmen died without passing on their skills. If precision mechanics was already a rare expertise in the ancient world, it might have simply vanished in the chaos. Possibility 3, it was expensive and impractical. Let's be realistic about what the Antikythera mechanism actually did. It calculated astronomical positions. That's useful. But was it useful enough to justify the enormous cost of building it? This device would have required a master craftsman working for months, possibly years. The bronze alone was expensive. The precision required was extraordinary. And at the end of all that effort, you had a device that did something a trained astronomer could do with pen and paper, just more slowly. For a wealthy patron who wanted to show off, the mechanism was a marvel. For practical purposes, maybe not worth the investment. Maybe no one else built them because no one else wanted to pay for them. I don't know which of these explanations is correct. Maybe all of them played a role. What I do know is that the Antikythera mechanism represents a road not taken, a technological path that humanity started down and then, for whatever reason, abandoned. Let me show you something that haunts me. The Antikythera mechanism was built around 150 to 100 BCE. The next known device of comparable complexity is the astronomical clock of Giovanni de Dondi, built in Padua, Italy, around 1364 CE. That's roughly 1,500 years. 15 centuries where no one in the Western world appears to have built a precision gear mechanism of this sophistication. 15 centuries where this technology simply wasn't. Now, to be fair, gear technology didn't completely disappear. Simple geared devices existed in the medieval period. Water mills used gears, some clocks used primitive gear trains. But the level of precision, the complexity of the calculations, the elegant solutions to astronomical problems, that was lost. When medieval clockmakers finally approached this level of sophistication in the 13th and 14th centuries, they had to reinvent everything from scratch. They had no access to the knowledge that created the Antikythera mechanism. They didn't even know it had existed. Think about what that means. If the ancient tradition of precision mechanics had survived and continued to develop, where would we be today? If Giovanni de Dondi had been building on 2,000 years of accumulated knowledge instead of starting fresh, what would he have created? We can't know. That alternative history didn't happen. The knowledge was lost, and humanity had to relearn it the hard way. I should note that the story is more complicated than ancient genius, medieval darkness, modern rediscovery. The Islamic world preserved and developed much ancient Greek knowledge during the centuries when Western Europe had limited access to it. Arab astronomers built sophisticated instruments, astrolabes, celestial globes, water clocks, that showed clear continuity with Greek traditions. Some historians believe that Islamic mechanical knowledge, filtering back into Europe through Spain and Sicily, helped spark the later development of European clockwork. But even the Islamic tradition doesn't show anything quite like the Antikythera mechanism. Its level of integration, its computational capability, remains unique until the early modern period. The Antikythera mechanism now sits in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. It's one of the museum's most prized possessions. You can see it yourself if you visit. The corroded fragments in one case, a working reconstruction nearby. When you stand in front of it, you're looking at something that shouldn't exist according to our old models of history. A computer from the age of Alexander the Great's successors, a precision instrument from before the birth of Julius Caesar, and you're also looking at a reminder of how much we've lost. Research on the Antikythera mechanism continues. In 2021, a team from University College London published a new paper in Scientific Reports proposing a complete reconstruction of the mechanism's front face, the part that displayed the positions of the planets. Their model suggests that the device was even more capable than previously thought, using an intricate system of nested rings to track all 5 visible planets simultaneously. Not everyone agrees with their reconstruction. The planetary section of the mechanism is the most damaged, and much of the evidence is fragmentary. But the ongoing debate shows how much we're still learning from this single artifact. There are questions we may never answer. Who built it? We have guesses, but no names. The writing style suggests a connection to the astronomical traditions of Rhodes or possibly Syracuse, but we can't be certain. Was it unique, or were there dozens, hundreds of similar devices now lost to recycling and decay? We don't know. What was it for? Display? Education? Practical astronomy? Religious purposes? The Olympics calendar function suggests it had some ceremonial significance, but beyond that, we're speculating. How was the knowledge transmitted? Were there schools of precision mechanics, apprentice systems, written manuals that haven't survived? We have no idea. And perhaps the biggest question of all, what else don't we know? If we were this wrong about ancient mechanical capabilities, what else are we wrong about? What other technologies existed in the ancient world that we've dismissed as impossible or exaggerated? I'm not suggesting aliens or lost civilizations. I'm suggesting something more unsettling. That human history is messier, more complicated, and more full of forgotten achievements than our textbooks admit. The Antikythera mechanism is proof that brilliance can be lost. That knowledge, painfully acquired, can simply disappear. I started this case file by telling you that the Antikythera mechanism isn't really a mystery. And that's true. We know what it is. But standing in front of it in that Athens museum, knowing what it represents, I felt something I rarely feel in my work. Not curiosity, not confusion. Wonder. 2,000 years ago on some island in the Mediterranean, a person whose name we'll never know sat down and solved problems that wouldn't be solved again for 15 centuries. They cut gear teeth by hand to tolerances of less than a millimeter. They designed mechanisms that modeled the irregular motion of the moon. They built a machine that calculated eclipses decades in advance. And then they, or their students, or their civilization, lost it all. The Antikythera mechanism isn't a mystery. It's a memorial. A memorial to human brilliance. A memorial to how fragile knowledge really is. A memorial to roads not taken and futures that didn't happen. Every gear tooth in that corroded bronze is a reminder that progress isn't inevitable, that what we learn can be unlearned, that what we build can be forgotten. And maybe that's the most important thing it has to teach us. The mechanism is still there, in Athens. You can see it. You should see it. Let it remind you how much we're capable of, and how much we have to lose. I'm Arthur Scott. This has been case file number 2, the Antikythera Mechanism, the first computer, the last of its kind, still keeping time 2,000 years later.